Well, folks, you know you're in for a treat when you hear that tune. It's time for another week of the RecPoker Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Reid, Bluff Storini in the home game and at RecPokerJim on Twitter. And I have the best freaking job in the world, talking poker with my friends here on the Strategy Forums edition of the podcast every Monday night while we steal each other's chips in the nightly home game. Now, I have to mention we're brought to you by the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino. They are the official sponsor of the RecPoker Podcast, and they're located less than an hour north of the Twin Cities in the beautiful state of Minnesota. You can find out more about them by going to runaces.com. And most of what we do here is free. We're a largely volunteer-based organization, so we really depend on the support of our sponsors and our fantastic premium members. You're going to meet one of them a little later on today. And if you're interested in getting involved with RecPoker, come sign up for a free account today. All it takes is an email address and a smile, although we do insist on both. And if you do want to take your membership to the next level and get more involved, learn more about poker, get involved in our training materials, our study sessions, our fantastic social events, all the great stuff that we do here at RecPoker. It's only $15 a month, and you can get your first month for only $5 by using the code RecPoker at checkout. So I encourage you to give that a try. Now, they let me host the show on Mondays, but I'm just one man. It takes a group, a gang, a crew to make the magic happen over here. And if you want to find out more about me and the rest of what we call the RecCing Crew, you can head on over to rec.poker/crew, or just listen up. You're going to meet a few of them right here on the show tonight. Take it away, gang.
I'm Chris Jones. You can find me 5B5 on Twitter or 5x5 in the PokerStars home game, and I run our monthly deep dive strategy segment.
I'm Kim Kilroy. I'm PetVet33 on social media. I am Fergie56 in the home game. And I run a hand history review once a month, second Wednesday of the month.
And I'm Rob Washam. You can find me as Rabman50 just about everywhere. And on the first and third Wednesdays of every month, you can join me and a bunch of our premium members as we discuss the latest poker book.
I'm Taylor Moss. You can find me on Twitter at Taylor_Moss or as Gopherboy TJM in the RecPoker home game, which I stream live on Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central. So come check us out at twitch.tv/RecPoker.
As you can see, just a little smattering of the smorgasbord of options that we have here with our RecCing Crew offerings. Is one of the reasons we like our premium members to get involved is you can come and join the forums edition of the show. Every once in a while, we get to make a new friend. I'm happy to be joined by premium member Joe Millay, who's been here on the show before. Joe, please introduce yourselves to RecPoker Nation.
My name is Joe Millay, and I am JM Tappy in the RecPoker home game.
Thanks for joining us, Joe. You've been a welcome addition to the forums episodes over the last little while. It's great to hear from you. We're going to be looking at a hand today that our own Chris Jones played in an online tournament just the other day that just got him thinking. And he said to himself, I got to bring this to the RecCing Crew and the RecPoker audience and see if we can hash it out. So, Chris, tell us a little bit about what made you decide to bring this spot in for the forums edition of the RecPoker podcast.
Well, you ever have hands where it works out really well, but you're not sure if it should have? That's
is there any other kind?
that's this hand. So, spoiler alert, this is going to go well for us, but unspoiler alert, I'm not sure if it should have even got to the point where it did. So, we are playing an ACR tournament. Registration has closed. We are not in the money, and it is not really close to the bubble. So, it's kind of that phase of the tournament. If you're kind of feeling your way out, trying to work your way down what I call the funnel, basically, of the tournament, where nobody else is entering and you're trying to winnow your way down to get to a good spot. We're at a table where I'm just looking at it right now. All the stacks are this is kind of also the stage of the tournament where chips are really distributed and they're pretty low. There's been a lot of last minute entries. I myself late regged this tournament, pretty max late regged it. So there's a lot of like 20 to 10 to 20 big blind stacks. The biggest stack at our table has 28. We have 14 and a half big blinds. And there's a lot of stacks in that 10 to 20 range. And it is on us in the low jack. And we have ace 10 of clubs. Again, I've got 14 and a half big blinds, and I just min open this hand.
Chris, there usually when stacks sort of get down to this size, you start seeing players start to shove, more widely than they had been before at this point in the tournament in particular. Can you sort of speak a little bit about like what that dynamic was? And was it sort of like were a lot of pots getting to showdown or was it a lot of like opening and 3-betting?
It's more, I would say, typical kind of ACR tournament. There's a lot of aggressive opening. I was planning to mostly open call off with this if I got shoved on. It's not the best hand, but strong enough. I've been really trying to not just open shove when I've got this many chips with that. I do it with some of the weaker small pairs and a few other holdings like this, but like a suited ace 10, I just feel like it has playability. I like to open it. So was my decision there. But
sorry, what position were you again?
Low jack.
Okay.
Yeah, I also kind of struggle a little bit with when to min open and when to shove with spots like this. I'm sure it's we could look it up according to the assumptions that you put in there. But does anyone here, Taylor, do you have something to add on that?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think this is common for people to be like, ace 10, should I shove? Should I open? Like, how do I feel about that? The way that I think about these spots is I think about like, what would my opponent call off for 14 big blinds? And like start thinking through those things. And then you start going through this and you're like, are they going to call off like ace 8 offsuit? Probably not. So like those are like the types of hands. It's like, okay, like I'm thinking about that. And it's like, how do I want ace 8 offsuit to react to my open with ace 10 suited? Well, I'd much rather they think that they have fold equity and are going to jam into us. And then we can call off and get in a pot against ace 8. Whereas if we jam, we're going to get them to fold. So that can also work out with how Chris was talking about this. Like I heard him say like low pocket pairs. Like if you have threes here, that's an appealing jam to me, because if your opponent has 4s, 5s, 6s, they're likely going to fold to a jam, but would do the inverse of that. Like if you min open, they may just rejam over the top of you, and then you're stuck trying to call off with 3s in that spot where you're potentially not doing very well. So that's how I think about those types of opens, because I think this is really common for people to not understand, like, 14, I should just always jam. No, I think you can mix some things in there and like start thinking about these hands and how you want them to play and how your opponent could potentially react.
Yeah, Rob, you unmuted there too. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I think there's been a migration, I think, in the last few years where when we get down underneath that 20 big blind, in the past, it was always, okay, I'm just going to jam. If I get a good hand, I'm just going to jam. And I think there's been this migration where you get to these types of stack depths now, and you see that min open. And I think it's very effective because you get to see how the rest of the table reacts before you commit the rest of your stack. Now, there's times where you could call off, and there's other times where you see a couple of players get active, and you say, well, I think I'm just going to give up on this one now. And you're not committing your stack, and you're allowing your opponents to make mistakes that you are not making. So I think, I've seen this more and more, and I've incorporated this a lot more into my game also, where I'll do a lot more min opening at those stack depths.
And I know Chris has a specific hand that we played, but I'm kind of curious in taking this just a little further. How important is it for us to have a balanced opening range here where, like, I guess we could say we're going to min open, because if it goes like min open, raise, shove, shove, then we can obviously fold and get out of the way. But are we going to have hands that we're planning to open and fold to a single raise in our opening range as well? And are they just worse? I mean, I guess you could say, for instance, like worse aces would that still have a blocker, but you're folding to a raise? Or Chris, tell me a little bit about that kind of range construction.
Even like I would probably, I don't even know if this is probably not right on the charts, but I think I would be thinking of this like ace 10 off. I'm probably open folding, and ace 10 suited. I'm probably open calling.
Okay.
So it's kind of even that level of distinction for me, but certainly like a hand like king 10, the suited versus unsuited variety is one that I'm going to open both, and I'm going to call off with the suited probably, depending on who it is.
Yep.
Do we have any limps at this stack size?
We probably should. I do not have
Okay.
any limps, but
This feels like it.
But we probably should.
If we did, would this be the kind of hand that can make the nuts, that can stand to call if it gets raised, or is it just too strong for that and we should be 2xing?
The thing that makes me say no limping here is our position that we're in. Is there's so many people that can raise small or relimp behind us and have position on us. I think some of the benefits of limping we'll see will come from a shorter stack size, kind of like this. But then when we're on the button, maybe even the cutoff, and then we're able to capitalize on position and kind of lower that. It also depends on the stage of the tournament that we're in. I think Chris is in a pretty good stage of the tournament for limping to be viable, like getting near the money bubble and kind of approaching some sort of higher ICM pressure. But I just think the position is too poor for us to consider limping.
Yeah, I was more thinking about this would be a hand that might fall into a limp and then back shove versus a raise versus one raiser. Like this is sort of the bottom of our range for doing that with.
Yep, I like that. And I like that we're being thoughtful about covering our bases in spots like that, because, you know, when we take exploitative lines, we open ourselves up to be exploited. So being thoughtful about what we're going to do, looking down the road a bit is crucial there. Okay, found a couple rabbit holes already. So we, our hero, Chris Jones, you make the 2x open from the low jack. What happens next?
So we have ace 10 of clubs, folds around to the big blind, who has 12.5 big blinds. So we cover them by 2. They are a fairly aggro player. Have a 15% 3-bet number. They're somebody who is c-betting almost all the time when they bet, defending fairly regularly. They've defended 77% of their big blinds. I have over 250 hands on them, so not a ton, but a decent number where we're kind of have a sense that this is a player that likes to play pots. Anyway, they call. So
awesome.
We go to a flop against this opponent. Flop is 2 of spades, jack of clubs, 7 of spades. They check to us, and we have a backdoor straight flush draw, or backdoor royal flush, backdoor flush draw, backdoor straight draw. We have an ace. Thoughts? We have what do we got now? We've got 12.5 bigs, and they're sitting there with like 10.5.
And we put into, they called 2, there's 1 for the ante, and
5.5 in the middle. Yep.
Half for the small blind, so 5.5. So roughly 2-1 SPR here. So I'll defer to the group here, but this feels like, is it Jack 7-2 two-tone?
Yes, 2 spades. The 7 and the deuce are spades, and then the jack is the club.
So this feels like we should be betting.
We have spades, right?
We have clubs. So we've got the back door only.
Okay.
I feel like it's tricky when stacks get this shallow, but I feel like we should be betting here. If we do, is it a one and done, or are we fine? Yeah, Taylor, you unmuted there. Talk to me.
I was going to say there's a lot of things that I think you can do here. I think the standard would be to bet like really small on this board, like 1.4 big blinds or something like that. A quarter pot or somewhere around there. Just because opponent is going to have to play like really face up versus us. It may be 1.4 big blinds, but that's a good chunk of their stack. Like they're not going to have much left afterwards. And it's still, if we take this line very frequently, we still have all of our strong holdings within there, and we can fire a lot on turns and, continue the aggression. So I don't think it's a one or done. I think there is a potential for us to consider a bigger bet. And by a bigger bet, I mean, maybe like 3.5, 4 big blinds and taking a one and done type of approach. However, it really stinks when we get like jammed on and we put in 3 bigs and then they put in 10 and we have to just fold, knowing we have backdoor equity. So personally, I don't like that line. I would be going small, and I don't think check is out of the line entirely, but I do lean way more heavily towards just a really small bet here.
The stacks are so short that we can still get them in on the river if we check here, and it runs out well for us. And there are a lot of good runouts for us, right? Clubs and Broadway. And I do like the idea of being able to to put chips in on a future street. Sorry, Taylor, what were you saying?
I was just going to say, but I do want to throw caution because if I'm big blind in this spot, what I would do versus really small C bet here is a really small check raise. I think that is super threatening. So I'm worried about opponent potentially doing that versus us, especially when Chris labeled him as aggressive. But if we go 1.4 and opponent raises to 3.1 or something like that, how are we going to react? It's really troubling for us to react to that. So I am kind of worried about that.
Yeah, Rob, you unmuted there.
No, I was just going to say I agree with Taylor. I think a 1.4, 1.5 big blind bet is probably how I would proceed. And like he said, a check is maybe okay also because the description of the opponent is that he's very aggressive. So he could definitely make we're down betting from our original open, and he could take that as, showing weakness and just c betting with anything we have, and take that as a sign that he can be aggressive towards us to try to get us to fold. So we're not getting as much of the right information as we normally would in this spot because the chip stacks are so small. Normally in this spot, you get called and you go, okay, well, he's either a non-believer or he's got some bit of that flop. But, in this case, it's we're going for stacks, either his stack or not. So yeah, it's a very tough. I could go either way, a small bet or a check. Yeah. And I think if he just turned around and 3-bet me, I'd probably jam over the top of him because I don't think I could believe him based on the stats that we have. I think his range is so much wider than a normal, tight player making the same move. But I think we could, if we bet small, we get a small 3-bet on top or raise on top, check raise on top, we can just go ahead and jam.
Yeah, it's hard for us to be dead here no matter how strong their holdings are, even though we can be behind. Just given the run out or given the board, it's hard for us to be completely dead. This is something that occurs to me in spots like this. If we do check here, are we opening the door? Are we waving the red flag for them to lead out on the turn with a bunch of hands that we're behind? And I think if it's not a club or Broadway, we probably have to fold to that lead because now we only have one card to come and we know that we're not making any of our backdoors. Is that something we should be worried about? I mean, it's kind of true if we just make the small bet and face the check raises as well. How do you guys deal with that? It's this is an aggressive opponent if I check, they can bet, but if I bet, they can check raise. They're both aggressive.
So I've been working on my hand reading skills. I think this is a really good question, Jim. But let's turn it over to Chris for a bit.
Yeah. Why don't we actually look at what actually happened, and we'll try to answer that question. How about that? I did check. I checked. I thought because of the aggressive nature of the player, I did not want to be check raised because I think if I had ace 10 of diamonds here, I think I'm betting almost every time. But with the backdoor clubs, I think there's a lot of turn cards that are really intriguing for this hand, and I didn't want to get blown off of it. And we may still have a lot of the time still have the best hand with the ace 10 right now. So I did check. And funny you should say it, does it wave some red flag? The turn is the 5 of hearts. So not one of the cards that we are really hoping for. Exactly the kind of situation you were describing. Our opponent, again, off a 10.5 big blind stack. We are sitting there with 12.5. They bet 1.25 big blinds.
That's gross. That's so gross. So this is just what we were talking about, right? Like when stacks get short like this, you can leverage a lot of your opponent's stack with these really small bets. This, I mean, it looks strong. It's one of those things where it's like, do they think they have fold equity here? Because it looks like a milking bet, doesn't it? Like, what would it be? A jack, like 8-9 or 9-10 of spades or something like that would probably go bigger. I hate it. I hate it. I just want to point out that this is episode, I don't know, 600 and something of the podcast. And I'm still rooting for clubs or Broadway to come. When Chris is like, he tells what the next card is, 5 of hearts. I'm like, I'm honestly heartbroken that it was the 5 of hearts. They're like, damn it, I really wanted Chris to hit a club or a Broadway here. Anyway, sorry, Taylor, you were saying.
Yeah, I think this is interesting. I think the one thing that I would not do here is fold. I think we're continuing in some sort of way. We have ace high here versus a big blind range. If they can find this with a lot of air, which their aggressive opponent, we called that out, like we know this is possible, that they could just kind of turn air into a bluff here. I think we have to be defending. I think we can even consider a raise. Kind of for the reasons that Rob mentioned before, like just not going to believe them when they kind of do something like this. We can still represent some pretty good hands, because I think when we check back on the flop, we do have some pretty good hands when stack sizes are this short, and we don't have to worry about going for 3 streets to get stacks in. We really only have to worry about 2 streets. And this could be essentially a pre-blocker bet in a sense for an opponent that maybe is holding bottom pair or something along those types of lines, where we could raise and really start to put them in some troubling spots instead of letting them dictate how this hand plays out. So I don't mind a raise. I think my first inclination is to just call in this spot, but I don't think I'm folding, not with ace high here.
Chris, you're nodding along. What's on your mind?
I agree. I considered the raise. Ultimately, I felt like this was I think this is a really big decision point. Like we either have to start saying, okay, I want to try to get a deuce to fold here, and I want to turn my hand into a bluff, or my ace has value. This player is very aggressive. And what I think if I call this, I have to make the decision that on good river cards, I may have to just grit my teeth, and because now I've left their bluffs in by calling them here, grit my teeth and hang on and try to win with ace high, I think is what we're doing when we're calling. I mean, there's going to be some bad river cards where we're going to have to change that plan, but that, I think I either am raising to try to get them off some of those kind of like weaker holdings that are beating me, or I'm like, this hand's still pretty good. It still might have some value, and I'm just going to hang on for dear life.
What do you think are good river cards for us.
Yeah.
Because we're now at a point
question.
where there's 2 spades out there. So spades are potentially not that great. But other than that, because I think that's another important piece for people as we're listening to this, like what are the good river cards that we are going to potentially hero on? What are the bad ones that we might, even though we think we're ahead now, might turn us into a fold on the river?
Yeah, I think spades are. I think potentially the next worst cards are the ones that are the like straightening cards. Kind of around the 7 and the 5, probably that really hammers the big blind range.
I
But
think
even
an 8
those
is like the
yeah,
worst one, right?
yeah,
Like 8
right.
is bad, 6 is bad, 9 is bad. Those types of things.
Yep.
I think those are the bad ones. The good ones, outside of an ace or a 10, right? Like kings aren't that bad. Jacks are pretty darn good
Jacks
for
are
us
good.
here. Even potentially the deuce, even though we think they might have a deuce, but that might help us kind of understand where they're at. I don't mind board pairs, and I don't mind kings and stuff like that.
And maybe like 3s and 4s, or like some of those, the very bottom end,
Yeah, 3's probably all right.
probably safe. But
Yep.
yeah, we're getting into the orange territory on the heat map, though. For
Yeah, no, I think
good-
I think 3 feels relatively safe.
Yeah. Okay, good question. I like that exercise. And
Yeah,
I
me
mean,
too.
listen, we're facing it. We're getting pretty good odds here to call and see a card in position. Like we get to close the action. It's a small bet. So it's definitely, they definitely have a lot of worse hands that are making this bet. I think if that's all we needed to know, I think we know that. But you're right, Chris. I think we're gonna expect to see some fireworks on the river. Any other thoughts on the turn? So we do call. Hero calls. Is that what I'm
Hero
hearing?
calls. Hero
All right.
decides to call. Whether I don't know if that's the right decision. Okay. Well, I'm glad we had that exercise. Okay. So again, the board is deuce of spades, jack of clubs, 7 of spades, 5 of hearts, and the river is the 4 of hearts. And villain shoves.
Oh,
Jack 7 5 4 2. You Taylor, you
so
unmuted. What's
shove it? Yeah, I mean, I unmuted to go. Because I'm really glad I didn't chime in, because right before we got to the turn and you were talking about fireworks, I was like, I honestly don't expect much fireworks. They're probably just going to continue for like half their stack at most, and then like leave it at that. But no, an all-in size is definitely interesting for them here. They're going very polar with what they're saying, so
Yeah,
I think
and
that's
what-
really like worth
Right.
like contemplating. Because it really, to me, feels like a jack or nothing, or they had some random junk that got there. So what would be 3-6?
5 4, maybe even like
Yeah, like a 2 pair type of thing. Like, I don't know. My radar's up on this one in terms of thinking they might be full of it.
They definitely could have backed into some 2 pairs here. Like you could see like 5 4 to 7 4 call. Yeah, probably.
Do you go for everything though with 2 pair? I think that's part of like what I struggle with is like we went 1.25. Did we only have 1 pair then, and then we hit 2 pair on the river? Like 1.25 does not feel like a 2 pair bet on the turn. So part of this is like the story isn't like making chronological sense to me.
And we haven't demonstrated a lot of strength ourselves. So if they were value betting, it's not clear to me that we've told them, oh, we have a jack, like we'll call a big bet. You know what I mean? So that also makes me think there are a lot of bluffs in there. Here, Rob, you unmuted.
Yeah, I think let's take a look again at the player type that we're talking about here. The fact that he bet on the turn means absolutely nothing about the strength of his hand. He's sitting there with queen 6, offsuit. It doesn't mean anything about the strength of his hand because we check. As soon as we check the flop, That gave him the green light to say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and bet. And then he bet the turn, and all we did was call. And so now another card that totally whiffed our range. Let's not talk about how it might have hit his range. Let's talk about how it totally whiffed our range, right? There's no way we have a 4 in our hand. So this gave him license to just jam that queen 6, saying, well, he doesn't have anything, and this 4 definitely didn't help him. So I'm going to make him fold. Bet is I'm going to make him fold. If he was really strong, he would be making a bet that would try to get called.
Right.
Or try to get you to go over the top of him.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of, I don't know if that's right thinking, but that's kind of the way I kind of approach some of these spots because they are so bizarre. They're just not, his range is really wide because he plays a lot and he's very aggressive. Our range is pretty well uncapped, but based on the way we've played it very weakly. So he can take that aggressive thing that he likes to do and jam it down our throat and try to get us to fold. So I think we have to call. And he has queen 6. He has queen 6.
So let's look at some of the bluff combos that they might have, because I think that some of the 2 pairs, I think the straight comes in. They could have slow played a set, I guess. I think we can discount some of those, but so any 2 spade, right? Any 2 spade would be firing here. I think some of those like 8-9 hands, the 7-8 hands that missed their straight draw, they'd be firing. Anything? Are they turning a pair of 2s into a bluff here or something like that? I mean, we have kind of capped our range just by calling the small bet on the turn, but feels like they can choose a better hand than that. As we're talking about it, I mean, I feel like there's enough bluff combos out there. Combine that with the player type. A 4 was one of the safer cards in my mind. It was in that like orange zone, but that put all that together, that kind of inclines me to a crying call. Does anyone else have any thoughts before Chris fills us in, Taylor?
No, I agree with that. I think I agree with a lot of what Rob was saying, kind of like identifying like what are they trying to do? Are they attacking us in those different spots? The only thing that like I think gives a lot of weight, in my opinion, is that turn bet and that turn bet size. Because if like they're now making a play on the river to try and get everything, if they had something on the turn trying to get something, I feel like they size their bet better to make it easier for them to get everything. Because right now this went from like tiny bet to big bet for them to make on turn and river. I think a lot of players will size it up where it's like medium on turn and river to try and get things. So in other words, going 2.5 on the turn to jam, what would that be then? Like 8 on the river, 7.5, 8. Like that's a much more easy geometric shift to make where they go 1.25 to 9.
9, yeah.
Is a bigger size where it doesn't feel like it's value to me. And maybe I'm reading too much into like how I perceive bet sizing to go through for myself and projecting that onto my opponent. But to me, that's the part that's really getting me hung up on here. And then when I think about like what are their potential value for taking those types of lines, it's just a lot of like 2-pair stuff that hit that 4 on the river, which I don't know like how much of that there is. Like, are they going to defend deuce 4 from the big blind? I don't know. The 5-4, probably the 7-4, maybe a little bit more so. Maybe a jack 4 suited, but it's like there's so few combos. There's the 3-6s that potentially exist out there because that could make some decent sense. But otherwise, I think they just have a whole lot of other stuff that could potentially be making this play where I'm going to just end up, I think, crying call this. But I think it's a lot based on the opponent, the line that they took, and then also just kind of like you probably can't call this all the time, but maybe if 2/3 of the time, 3/4 of the time, we can find a call when we don't hold a spade and stuff like that.
I do really like the point you make about the sizing, Taylor, because what they've done is they've chosen a very small sizing on the turn that sets up, I think, just like a bit of an overbet relative to the pot on the river. And as you point out, they could have just bet a little bit bigger on the turn. And because of the geometric properties of bet sizing, they would have a much more sort of like mainstream, reasonable bet size to shove on the river. And that would be a more value heavy line. So this does feel like they've saved that overbet as a bluffing option.
Because if you've got Jack 5 here or, whatever, 2-pair on the turn, like we're not making 1.25 our bet size here, right? We're going a little bit bigger. We're trying to make it easier because we're already trying to eye up like the whole stack.
Right.
It feels like very much the plan out of our opponent was take a small stab, just see if I can get an auto fold from my opponent. And then when they don't get raised on the turn, now they're at this spot and they're like, this couldn't help us. And then like the same thing Rob was talking about, they may just be making this play. It's like, there's no way this helps them. And if they didn't bet on the flop and they didn't raise me on the turn, of course I can, just jam and get them to fold their ace highs and no pair hands.
Makes a lot of sense. Chris, how are you feeling?
I'm really glad to have this conversation. And to me, the sizing was one too that really had me because I just felt like if this player had Jack 10 or something like that, I just feel like a lot of player types, especially aggressive players, have this sense of there are 2 spades on the board. It's kind of a straighty board in some ways. I want to charge the draws. I want to push them off some of that stuff. I don't want to make it easy for spades to just auto call me in this spot. So I just felt like a jack is going to size up. And if they don't have a jack here, then they just have this kind of weird 2-pair stuff that we've been talking about. So I just elected to call too. So, I called, and like I said at the beginning, it worked out well. Any guesses? Rob says Queen 6.
I think it's like 8-7, 9-7.
Well, that
8-9.
beats us, so that's terrible.
What? Oh,
There's a 7 on the board.
8, 9, 10-9.
I feel like they have an
those
8 in their hand. I'm going to guess 10-8 offsuit.
Deuce of spades, Jack of clubs, 7 of spades, 5 of hearts, 4 of hearts, 10-3 of hearts.
Okay. Was there a heart? There was not a heart on the flop, but
well, there was 2 hearts, but they're the last 2 cards. So
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it wouldn't have mattered at that point.
Right.
So they had nothing going for them on the turn, even.
Yeah.
Right?
And that makes sense with it. Again, it was a small stab. Trying to just get some queen highs to fold or king highs to fold versus this. And then they got to that spot on the river. They're like, well, I can't win with this. And my opponent hasn't shown anything. I can get him to fold over cards or high card hands.
Yep. I mean, they're not wrong. A lot of people fold.
I mean, I almost folded this, so
Yeah, no, exactly. So what do you guys think about this? Because I'm in this spot from time to time, and me, I like to bluff. I like to make people fold. I'm a red line player, and there's only 2 ways that I kind of think about bluffing. I can either do it when I have a good hand that has card removal qualities or blocker qualities for my opponent, or I can just do it where it's a good spot because they've demonstrated weakness, and whether I have a good hand or not, it's they're weak. I should try bluffing here. What do you guys think about that? Choosing the times to bluff. How important is it to have a card in your hand that's a good bluffing candidate? And how important is it to just sort of feel weakness and go for it? Chris, you're the only unmuted player, so I'll ask you first.
I think that's a little bit between a feel player versus a GTO or a math player. To me, you want to start with the theory, which is the blocker quality and to have those good cards in your range to make sure that you've got like, on this board, like the fact that we don't have spades makes this a much easier call. But I think if we're, our opponent making this play, we probably don't want to do it as much with two spades. Like that might be one where we want to pull back. And so like those things I think are really good to at least have in your head. So you know what makes good bluffs theoretically. But if you've got a read that somebody's like weak and you've got a terrible, like if I had two spades on this, if I had ace 10, can I have ace 10 of spades? Yes, I can.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you could.
So if I had ace 10 of spades here, this hand would have played out differently, but let's just say I did. And I've just got to read that this guy is just like, there's just so much over bluffing here. Then I think you can push yourself towards a call even if you got the wrong cards.
Right.
That's, I guess, my take.
Yep. Rob?
Yeah, when it comes to bluffing, it's interesting to think about because I'm usually doing some semi-bluffing, on the flop and on the turn. And then when we get to the river, that's where you have to make that decision.
Mm-hmm.
Is this a spot where I can actually pull off the triple barrel or whatever it is? And I think some of those determinations like blockers and what you think your opponent is holding come into play quite a bit, but they're just very small nuances that you can't really depend on to make your decision. It might help a little bit, but it's not really something that you should be thinking about. And so I like what Chris said about the read on your opponent. And then when you're doing that, you're going to say, okay, what hands that he beats me with can I get him to fold? And then go back through your train of thought to what are the hands that you put him on, and does his range include enough of those types of hands that you can bluff him? So I think it has a lot to do with the previous action. I think Taylor mentioned that when we were talking earlier that, based on the previous action is going to tell you where you stand and what the strength of your hand looks like. So that's really how I do it more than anything else. And if I can't come up with that hand that I can make fold with a bluff, then I probably won't try it.
I like that. It's true that like even if you have good combos in your hand, you should still only be semi-bluffing against weak ranges, right? Like you shouldn't take it as I had the ace of hearts and I was blocking the nut flush, so I had to go for it. Like they're just candidates. You need to be playing against someone who's capable of folding to a bluff. Otherwise, it doesn't matter how good the carrots in your hand are. Taylor, you unmuted there.
Yeah, I was going to say we could probably end up talking about this for a really long time if we wanted to, but to try and keep it somewhat simple, the things that I think about is, does my story make sense with my bluff? Because when you're bluffing, you're essentially representing some sort of strong hand. Does my story make sense for that? Do I think my opponent is capable of folding a strong hand, or do I think that their range consists of a lot of hands that are going to fold is going to be the next thing that I ask myself? And then the third thing I'm going to ask is like, do I have relevant cards? And relevant cards may change at different aspects of the hand because you may want to bluff with some equity that you could, potentially catch up if you're on the flop or the turn. In which case, in this example that Chris had, spades would be a good hand to be bluffing with on the flop or turn, because if you get called because you were wrong, you can catch up. However, then once you get to the river, it's bad to have spades because you wanted your opponent to have those draws and those hands so that it kind of flips the other way. So it's like, where are you at within the hand, and do your hands make sense? So those are the types of things that I think about, or things that I think about when it comes to bluffing.
I love it, Kim.
I was just going to say, like, I don't mind the hand the guy picked because he has the 3 as a blocker. I think a 3 and a 6 in your hand in this kind of hand is really good. But I think when you're thinking about bluffing, you got to look at what people are thinking about you. So if I've been playing a tight game, then I think this bluff will get through. If I've been had a really good run of cards and happened to be playing a whole bunch of hands, then I think it's way less likely the bluff will get through. So that's what I take into consideration when I'm thinking about bluffing on the river.
I love it. Well, that was a really good conversation. Does anyone have any parting thoughts? Chris, kudos on finding the call there in real time. I think it's harder for us to sort of do this combo count and put ourselves in our opponent's shoes. Really valuable exercise to be able to think in advance, like what are the good rivers for me? What are the bad rivers for me? And sort of let that help you limit the number of decisions you have to make while that time bank is ticking down. All right. Well, great conversation, gang. If folks are listening to this when it comes out, you've probably still got, I'll remind folks again, unfortunately, we love the folks at Running Aces, but they have had to postpone some of their promotional events over the summer. So Rec Poker Weekend is not happening on August 2nd and 3rd after all, unfortunately, but we'll make it up with another event sometime soon. If you've enjoyed the show and you want to help us out, you can go to rec.poker/support and find a few ways to help out the show and the group here by subscribing or liking to some things without spending a dime. And of course, there's also a chance to spend a dime or even more than a dime supporting the show, which we would also greatly appreciate. Head over to rec.poker/support for that. And if you've enjoyed hearing how different members of the RecPoker Crew talk about poker, most of our RecPoker Crew members offer coaching to our members and to our audience. I think you'll find it's probably the best value available out there. And you can kind of pick who amongst the RecPoker Crew you'd like to work with. And so head over to rec.poker/coaching, and you can find some fantastically fun and friendly folks to help take your poker game to the next level. Well, I want to thank Running Aces for their support over the years. Thanks to Joe Millay for joining us here in the RecPoker Crew booth for this forums edition of the podcast. Chris Jones, Rob Washam, Taylor Moss, and Kim Kilroy. We couldn't do it without you. Thanks to everyone who listens at home and just everyone who's involved with Rec Poker. We really appreciate it. And we'll see you next week on the Rec Poker podcast. Good night, everybody.